Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
Hi, I'm Susan, and I'm a college counselor and have read applications for a small liberal arts college and 2 research universities. My twins are recent college graduates.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of 2 daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a wellness coach at Keenan Flagler Business School at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, a college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. This week in the news, Lisa and Susan will discuss an article that appeared in the Chronicle, and it looks at, is loneliness a bigger problem than smoking on college campuses? Our question from a listener, Susan, is back, and we'll be taking a question from Marion from Pennsylvania, and she wants to know what her son can do about his lack of rigor in the first couple years of high school. How does he communicate that to his colleges? And for our interview, it's a surprise interview, and I'll have more about this later. Rick Clark, the Executive Director of Strategic Student Access at Georgia Tech, and he'll be discussing, what do you do if you're deferred from a school you applied to? What are the next steps? And we have a brand new college spotlight. Linda talks about her visit to DePauw University in Greencastle, Indiana. She'll be joined by Lisa, and it's part 1 of 2.
And now it's time for Hot Topics in the News.
Hi, Susan. How are you?
I'm good, Lisa. Such a pleasure to have this chance to spend some time with you.
Oh, likewise. I'm so glad we got the band back together again.
That is what it feels like.
It's the Susan and Lisa show. And on the Susan and Lisa show today, we're going to discuss, it's an article that was in the Chronicle about student loneliness and ways that it might be overcome. And it's actually a transcript of a discussion between 2 reporters. And the reporters are Jack Stripling and Alex Kafka. And so I'm just going to very, very briefly summarize some of the things that they talked about, and then you can give us your brilliant insights. So, but basically, this article was prompted by the fact that in 2023, they did a poll of college students, Gallup did, and about 40% of college students stated that they had felt lonely the day prior. And that's a pretty high number. And so this is concerning. I know the Surgeon General has come out and said that loneliness is epidemic. And there's some thought that loneliness is bad for your health. Like, I think there's a point in this article where they compare it to smoking 15 cigarettes a day.
Yes, I saw that.
Seems like a very severe thing. But they're kind of wondering what factors are causing these students to feel lonely. And so the one thing that they do, which I think, and they talk about a book by Jeremy Noble called Project Unlonely. And what Noble does is he defines loneliness as 3 types: societal, psychological, and existential. So societal is where you feel like you don't fit in, you're not part of a group, you're an outsider. And so that, I think, is probably the thing that maybe colleges could address the most. Psychological is just that need for emotional intimacy and companionship that we all have. And then existential loneliness is sort of trying to figure out, I guess, what your place is in the world and how you fit in, which, can be difficult, if not impossible to do. So I think they focus most on the societal loneliness in this article. And they have looked at 3 factors that they think might be contributing to the increase and loneliness. And the first one is obviously the pandemic. The pandemic perhaps interfered with these students at a very critical time in their development, and perhaps they did not develop the social skills, or sort of developmentally delayed in that respect, and they're sort of behind where prior generations have been in terms of developing social skills because of the enforced isolation. The second one is social media and smartphones. And as you pointed out, that obviously began before the pandemic. But the kids have a whole world in their hand that they can have. It's 24/7, and so they're not bored essentially, and looking for stuff to do. And then finally, and I thought this was interesting, is that they think that perhaps parental over involvement, the whole classic helicopter parent, the snowplow parent, kind of keeps the kids from engaging more with their current environment in college. And that would be their peers and then the professors or the school at large. So, and then they suggest a couple of solutions, but I'm going to stop here and sort of ask you what your thoughts are about those things.
Well, that's a great summary, Lisa. And you and I have studied a lot of psychology over the years, right? You from a
Yes.
clinical, as a clinical provider, and being in the trenches with kids and parents in terms of therapeutic care, and now, of course, college counseling, college planning, the two being inextricable. And me from probably what I would call more of a sociological standpoint. My academic background is counseling, psychology and counseling. But, my career has been on a college campus, exactly the kind of school they're talking about in this interview, which is small, residential, intensely social. And on top of that, like my own college experience, Bates College, where I worked for a dozen years, was somewhat isolated, so that students' lives were very campus centered, right? Kind of the ideal, what many of us feel is the ideal college experience, living on what feels like a country club campus with a devoted faculty who have all this attention to lavish on undergraduates. Um, After that experience, I switched to the secondary level and did, a couple decades in a boarding school community, which intensely residential, intensely social, but not a therapeutic school by any means. But I would say boarding schools at their very best are healing, uplifting, very positive environments if a family is very intentional about the kind of school that they pick.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And Mark and I were lucky to work at a boarding school together that was extremely intentional about turning down the heat on competition and not so much expectations, but really a strong focus on honoring students' individuality and gifts, and teaching those wonderful values of grit and resilience and problem solving. A bit of a throwback, I'm
Yeah.
afraid.
Well, let me ask you this. So you kind of worked in what we might say are two ideal settings to foster student interaction. Did you think it worked?
I think it worked incredibly well at that time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
At that time, it worked because it was an intentional community that kind of made a point of breaking up stereotypes and leveling, kind of a leveler among students. The thing about, and most of our listeners have kids who are at, public schools, private schools, day schools. That's the standard American experience. Boarding schools, I think, are something unbelievable, like less than 3% of the population. But Mark's in my school was Quaker, and while the majority of students were not from that faith tradition, the values were explicit of care and camaraderie and the things that tend to help young people, just like summer camp. And I often thought about that, Lisa, that, not every kid's going to go to boarding school. Very few do. But, as parents, we can think about ways to get our kids into intentional kind of community building experiences that give them an opportunity to know themselves, appreciate others. And for me, growing up, especially in New York City, where you didn't quite have a lot of the typical suburban, activities and rites of passage, and it was fine for me. It was what I knew, of course. But summer camp, sleepaway camp, became the place where I learned the most about myself. I was independent, even at a young age, independent from my parents. But there was simply that day-to-day, night-to-night experience of learning who you were, doing things that you love doing with a lot of kids that shared, your passion, whether it was for arts and crafts or sports, or I think of, the scouting merit badges, the skills we learn, outdoor education, horses, a sport. And it was probably the most formative, aside from having a wonderful family and being in the city, which the resources were great. Summer camp very much shaped my social skills.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, looking back, and especially as I studied psychology and counseling, I realized that a lot of kids don't have that. And,
Right.
Now on this side of my career, I'm back reading applications for a selective university. That's my day job during the winter months, and working with, as you and I do, we work with, sophomores, juniors in the college planning process, get them into senior year, and try and keep, a rational, structured, healthy process for them and their parents. So right now I kind of have a foot in both camps, but reading applications now at a selective university and reading all these essays and recommendations, it's very clear to me that the kids who have been in kind of team building, highly social networking experiences and activities know themselves better. Now, this could be a job. I just read an essay yesterday, in fact, from an applicant who the family would not have any resources to pay for a summer camp. It's a lot more expensive now than it was when I was there. But the student was in scouting and then had held a job from the age of 14, where, they were on a team. They were responsible for learning skills. They were being supervised, evaluated, encouraged, and then I read applications from kids who they've been in competitive sports. They've been doing academic research, kind of going after the golden rings that, a lot of parents feel are the tickets to selective college admission, the things that look good on a college application and will impress those of us who read their applications. But they don't have those other experiences where they are learning to follow, learning perhaps to respect other students' talents that are different from their own. They're doing a lot of solitary, what I would call, and I hesitate to use this word because it feels really critical to me, self-aggrandizement activities. And by that, I'm not being negative, actually. I'm just saying activities that serve the student's development and resume.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe rather than teach those psychological coping skills that you and I, that Angela Duckworth, talks
Right.
about so brilliantly in her work on grit and resilience.
Yeah, and I think you bring up so many important points because I think like when you got sent to summer camp, you didn't have a choice. Their parents took you there and they said bye, and then you had to survive, right? And so that's a key point. I think if you have a choice of doing something that might be difficult or causing you anxiety or not, most human beings say, "Yeah, I'm going to skip it today. I'll do that
Right.
tomorrow." And I think that kids, have they have an out. I will never forget this. And this was before the pandemic, but Lily and I visited a college, and then like there was a bizarre thing where we couldn't drive the rental car across state lines. It was like this bizarre thing, so we had to take like an airport shuttle
Yeah.
from the University of South Carolina to Charlotte Airport, and so we were, it's a bunch of students. We're all on there, and I just was surprised because I know like when I took airport shuttles from the University of Chicago to, wherever, we were all like, bloop, 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 what do you do? Nobody said a word to
Word. Wow.
anyone. It was completely silent and it was an hour and 40 minutes. And, I just think I'm an introvert, but I probably would have had like a new friend out of that by the time
Oh my gosh, what
I
an interesting
I left
illustration.
it. Yeah. And so because, it's a little uncomfortable to get to know people. You feel a little, yeah, what if this person doesn't like me? What if I don't like them? What if they're weird? What if I'm weird? And so if you can just look on your phone, maybe that's easier in the short run. And so it kind of just doesn't push people.
Exactly. And you know what else is interesting about that is when I left high school and went to college, there was no way to stay connected to my social network from high school. And
Hmm.
even camp was the same. All we could do is write letters.
Right. And here people can be, in constant
Right.
touch with their high school friends. And so,
That's
is that
right.
better? Is that worse? I have no idea.
But you don't have to make new friends necessarily.
Exactly. It does not foster that, that in the moment kind of making friends like you hope that people will do at college. One of the things that they point out in the article is that colleges who are more successful at getting students to interact with each other really have to use what is like activation energy. So it's up to the lonely person to stop being lonely, right? They are the ones who have to leave their room and go out. But like there's going to be resistance to that. And so in order to activate that, you've got to like up the ante. I know like maybe when you and I were back in school, someone offered free cupcakes, we were there,
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
But now free cupcakes is not going to do it. It might be like free cupcakes and this really fun activity or something that's very like focused on a task. The example they use is the Colorado School of Mines, like has this cardboard boat building competition that all students participate in, and just kind of through the act of making and perhaps sinking these cardboard boats, they learn about each other and become friends. So, I think that is one key thing that is different for Gen Z. Like you just can't expect them to do it themselves. They have no motivation to do it themselves,
That's
right?
right. Unless they are someone who are so extroverted by nature, which is what my driving factor was, in my life was that I just simply, and I think my personality was cultivated also by my circumstances, my natural inclination to want to
Hmm.
connect with people and do things. It was always a struggle to do things on my own because I wanted to be connected, but sometimes that can put you in a lot of competitive situations. Like families ask me all the time about Greek life and whether
Hmm.
Greek life really is what can stand in the gap for college students in terms of a ready-made social, I don't know, social world, I guess, ready-made relationships, ready-made. And I go back and forth on that because I do, as I read applications now and having been in a high school for a long time, I see the value of collaborative activities. And, not everybody's going to play a sport that, your theater kids kind of go in that direction. You've got dance kids, you've got student journalism kids. And that's what's wonderful about high school is students can try out all those things, right? Without hopefully thinking about what's going to impress the colleges. They really, I feel, need to look for what it is that brings them joy.
Hmm.
The interview pointed that out, that joy kind of, you have to up the ante on joy for your children
Hmm.
these days, that
Right.
competition may bring a modicum of joy, but it also can bring a tremendous stress and sorrow and self-disappointment, which is
Hmm.
one of the things that points to self-destructive harmful behaviors in college, where the joy, stress, whatever that balance beam is, where the joy is gone and all the young adult post-teenager has is the pain. And
Hmm.
if it's not cool to do things for joy, and this is one of my hot tips for college searches, is kids and parents need to put their finger on those things that bring joy, bring fulfillment. That doesn't mean necessarily being the champion, being the MVP or having the lead role. But when you sit down as a, family with a junior in high school and you make a list, you make a balance sheet of what gives you joy and what is kind of the pain points in your life, and make sure as you do college research that you're really paying attention to that. I'm happy to admit to people I picked my college based on the riding stable. I really did, because there was nothing in my life, thank you summer camp, that made me more joyful than horses and the people that gravitated toward being with them. And I don't mean fancy schmancy,
No, no.
expensive stuff. I mean the shoveling the manure part of it too. As a city kid, for me, that was nirvana. But that's literally what I did. And my parents kind of got it. We figured any decent liberal arts college would do in terms of delivering a good academic program. And I'd gone to a pretty stressful high school, so I knew I didn't really want that anymore. And I looked at all the colleges where my happy camp counselors had gone. And it was a simpler day. But you know what? It's still a basic framework for a good college search is
Yeah, joy is really a good thing to try to build in. And to, like I said, like you were able to identify that as a young person.
right. And I think kids do still, don't you? Don't you think, Lisa, when you
Oh,
work with high schoolers?
I mean, yes and no. Because if you're on your phone all the time, you're not out there trying things. Because, like, what is like the thing that makes humans innovate and try new things? Being bored. Humans, like, boredom is the cornerstone of civilization. I honestly
I
feel.
like that.
And so, like, if that's, I think, where there's that tension. You can also explore a lot of things, through social media and being on your phone too. So I don't mean it's all bad, but I think it's, again, it's like that slight discomfort that pushes you to try to do something different. And then that's sort of maybe where you discover your joy a bit more. So I think that, kids have to look for joy, families have to look for joy, which is different than looking at prestige,
Hmm.
and like in the US News and World Report rankings. There's not that I know of a fun ranking, like a joy ranking, because, well, probably that's so individualistic, but also, like, we're Americans, we don't really focus on those kinds of things. Um,
That's true.
it's capitalism, baby. You got to go out there and
That's such a good
make the
point,
money.
though. It's such a good point. And there are some traditions that when you go to university, and this is certainly true outside of the United States, and I work with a lot of international families, a lot of times where the parents are immigrants to the US from Europe, from Asia, where university takes on a very different meaning.
Hmm.
It's not about growing up. You're supposed to have grown up in high school. Whereas the American vision is that those college years is really where you, as this interview talked about, where kids develop the independence and the initiative and things that in a way we've kind of taken away from them in high school. That this is part of the over parenting, as crime has gone up, and drug and alcohol abuse, all the negative kind of dimensions that get a lot of publicity in our news and in our society. They've always been there, but they have not been broadcast in the same way, right? They were they were much more under wraps in previous previous history. But now that everybody knows everything about everyone.
Friends, this concludes the first part of Lisa and Susan talking about, is loneliness a bigger problem than smoking? We hope you join us next week for the final part.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
Hi, Susan.
Hey, Mark.
Susan, I had a question from Southeast Pennsylvania, so I had to give it to you. You know the high school, whatever it is. It's from Maria, who is a second-time QFL sender. So we're happy to have you ask again. Let's play the question and get your thoughts.
Hi, YCBK crew. This is Maria from Southeast Pennsylvania. You've actually answered one of my SpeakPipe questions before on scholarship displacement. Was featured in one of your episodes a few months ago. So thank you so much for all of that information, and I hope it helped a lot of your families to be aware of this and if there's anything they need to know. So thank you again for that. This next question I have is a little more personal, but I'm hoping that the answer to that would help others also. So my son is a senior now in high school. He's going to be applying to school this year, to colleges this year. And he's always been a very strong student academically, did well on his SATs, is able to put together a relatively good application moving forward. He's not interested in any of the highly rejective schools, but a lot of even the smaller liberal arts schools that are in this area have become more selective, certainly than they were when I was a kid. But in looking at his application, we did have a concern about his math rigor. So his math placement was determined in 8th grade, which was a year that was impacted by COVID. He spent more than half the year learning online in his bedroom, and he was taking Algebra 1 at that time. Despite ending very, very strong in that class, he was only recommended a college prep level geometry for 9th grade, which he accepted and finished very strong in 9th grade geometry. And despite doing well in that class, was only recommended college prep level algebra 2, which he completed 10th grade, did very well in. And same thing happened for 11th grade. Instead of pre-calc, he was recommended algebra 3 trigonometry, which is the basically college prep level for the honors pre-calc course. So in 11th grade, we started kind of questioning that, which probably should have been questioned before that. But we both accepted that we thought maybe this was the teacher's recommendation, regardless of how he was doing. But we learned that you had to actually advocate if you wanted to move up a level. They would not just automatically place you in a higher level just because you had an A+ in the class. And just to give you a little bit of perspective on the school, it is a public high school, around 2,000 students and only 4 guidance counselors. The turnover in staffing, basically, my son's had a different guidance counselor every year for 4 years. So no one's really gotten to know him. He hasn't really gotten to know anyone else, and did not receive very good guidance from year to year. So here we are. He finished strong in 11th grade. He learned that he had to advocate for himself. He did. He's now taking AP and honors level math, calculus, and statistics, respectively, and is very excited about it. He knows that he does well in math. He got a 700 in math on his SATs. So, not the top score, but does relatively well and is excited for this. Now, my question, after giving you all of that background so that you can kind of understand what we're asking, is how does he present this in his college applications? How does this stand out in a way that would be positive for him and not negative for him? He hasn't had very much rigor in math, specifically in 3 years of high school. Math, he's not looking necessarily to be a math major, but he is interested in economics and potentially analytics, which does include math, of course, at the college level. So again, just looking for some advice maybe on how to frame this in an application, how to include this, how to talk about this in a way that, again, can come out looking like a strength instead of a weakness. So, again, thank you so much for everything that you have done, and we do greatly appreciate it. Thanks.
Well, this is a good one. And I, living also in southeastern Pennsylvania, Maria, I feel your pain. It's an area, full of great public high schools, great independent schools, great colleges, and great public universities. We are very blessed in this area to have a wealth of educational opportunities available to us. So that said, a few things come to mind, and part of my response is going to be from the college counseling, having worked with lots and lots of high school kids over the years, but also reading applications for a couple of selective universities. My first comment is it matters where he ended up, not how he got there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So colleges read transcripts backwards. Mark has heard me say that over the years, that when a transcript is opened up in the admissions evaluation, the first thing that is looked at is where is the student at as a senior? What are they taking? And then, of course, then it goes backwards in time to see the foundational work that a student did to get them to that level and what the trajectory has been. And, of course, what the high school has made available to that student. So I don't actually think there's anything your son has to say about this, without knowing more about the transcript. Okay, just based on what you shared. The fact that he is in, AP and honors calculus and statistics as a senior really says it all. In my mind, I'm thinking that Algebra 3 and trigonometry class was basically pre-calculus. It is at a lot of schools. That's what they call kind of their college prep pre-calculus. He then somehow elevated to calculus, AP calculus maybe, or honors and statistics. So he must have done something, perhaps, if there were any gaps there to get there. He might want to mention that he took it on himself, be it over the summer or online or whatever, to prepare himself for that highest level of math senior year. But, kudos to him. And again, think of it as it's where he's finishing high school, kind of not how he got there. Your son may actually have done himself a big favor unintentionally by taking a more measured approach to math. What we saw with COVID and before COVID, we've seen kids, especially boys, moving faster through math curriculum than they should have. And they end up in higher level math in 10th and 11th grade, and their grades decline because they don't necessarily have the cognitive maturity to handle the abstract nature of higher level math. And kids pay a big price for that, of rushing through math. I've worked with kids, and Mark, I'm sure you have too, who have taken Algebra 1 and Algebra 2 and geometry in middle school and ended up in pre-calculus in 9th grade. More power to them, but sometimes the cognitive maturity isn't there to excel, and they end up hurting themselves in the end. So I only say that maybe, Maria, your son was fortunate in that he slowed down. And especially with the pandemic hitting him in 8th and 9th grade, he was able to build that foundation that apparently is serving him, very, very well now. Could he have gone to summer school? Could he have taken an online class and accelerated? Maybe, but he didn't. He took his time, he built the skills, and he nailed the SAT. He's taking the highest level of math for his interests. I think this sounds like a very positive picture, and one that he can not have to feel ashamed of or provide excuses for.
Yeah, I agree 100% with Susan. Let me start with what you said with the math. Where I saw that the most, Susan, was when I was at Westtown, because I'm in admissions and a lot of kids would have Algebra 1 in middle school. And then I get to Westtown, and yeah, I'm doing admissions. I'm helping Susan as an adjunct on the counseling side, but I also have advisees.
Right.
And I can mention the school. De La Salle was one of our huge feeders.
That's right.
And it's one of these places, it's a school in 96 in Amsterdam and New York, where kids were doing well in geometry, and then they would get into Algebra 2 or pre-calc, and all of a sudden they weren't doing well.
That's right.
Multiple times I had to meet with Jay Farrow, and it turns out that some schools call something Algebra 1, and it might only cover 60% of the Algebra 1 curriculum.
Right.
Or
It's really
80%.
pre-algebra.
Yeah, and then you get absolutely killed when you get to pre-calc and have that algebra foundation. So we saw a lot of that. I completely agree with you, Susan. There are several things in Maria's question that made me feel this student is fine. One is, of course, the fact that schools read your application backwards and look at where he's ending up. I mean, calc and stats. Another is his grades have been consistently high all the way along, even in the lower levels and in these higher levels, his grades are high. He's got a 700 math score. She even said he's not even applying as a math major, and then she said that he's not even looking at the most highly rejectives.
Right.
So all of those are someone who's perfectly fine. So one option is to not say anything, and he should be fine. The only other thought that I had was he could, if he wanted to, but if there was a college-specific custom prompt, talk about how he learned to self-advocate for himself, and this could be turned into that.
Yep.
I realized, hey, I'm getting here, I'm doing well, I'm not that challenged, and then the next year, and then so he could tell a story, especially if there's some authenticity and he did the advocating and it wasn't all parent advocating. Like that could be turned into a story, and that's not going to sound like you're whining or woe is me about
but there is a danger of pointing fingers, though, Mark, and I'm not picking on Maria's son here, but
yeah,
to point a finger and say, turn over in the guidance office, nobody told me, nobody, that kind of thing. Absolutely not.
Yes.
First of all, in defense of the school counselor, if anyone is to blame here, it was the math department for not identifying that he should be bumped up a level. And I don't think necessarily he should have, but we don't know. But absolutely do what you just said, Mark, and watch out for crossing that line of saying, I could have blah, 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 right? Because, it would be one thing if the trajectory was different and he was finishing high school in Algebra 2. Then there should have been an intervention for a high-level math achiever, but also the parents at that point and the students should have said, we at least want to end up in high school in pre-calculus.
I think people don't realize how it comes across when they say things that kind of slight the school a little bit. And we're going off on a tangent a little bit here because nobody even talked about doing that.
This is not.
We're just giving a warning on what not to do. Don't throw the counselor, the school under the bus for things like that. But there's a lot of that we see on the counseling side. I think talking about how hard a teacher was and that's why you got a low grade. I do not advise that, Susan.
No.
In the same way, it just does not come off good. Well, it just doesn't.
I think a student can always talk about their learning experience, their maturation, how they learned to advocate for themselves, and all these skills that will help them be successful in college is a wonderful approach to take.
Yeah. So do you feel there's a way the student could, if he chose to, if there was an essay where the prompt lined up nicely for him to talk about how he realized that, I'm not saying he should do this, but do you feel that you could thread that needle and talk about, I realized that I could speak up, I could do this, and I went in and I talked to them and they let me do it and I did it, and I was like, I see potential for how that could be turned into elevating a positive personal quality without throwing a school under the bus.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
A lot of colleges in their personal qualities section of their evaluation websites have a box labeled taking responsibility for one's education. That's kind of the overall descriptor of evidence that the student has begun to step into that place of realizing this is their education and that they're driving the bus.
I was really happy, to have David Hawkins from NACAC really highlight. NACAC just started asking about personal qualities, and it shot right up to 5, and now it's number 4 really quickly in the feedback from admission officers, when they never even asked that question, but on feedback from admission officers, hey, I want you to put it in there, because I do feel like overall, I feel like the average person doesn't realize how much personal qualities are so valued in any holistic admission.
That's very true.
Because the average person, when you talk to them, they will make comments so many times around grades and scores.
Mm-hmm.
And as if they're the bench, they'll make little comments like, and God bless them. People, can't expect people that haven't done the work to know all this stuff. That's why people are listening to try to learn the work. No one's being critical here. But people will make comments like, that's messed up. Like, this kid had a 1210 and he got in, and they never took this kid who had a 1360. Like that, like there's this sense that test scores and grades are being pure, fair, and objective, and all this other stuff is just a bunch of mamby-pamby mushy stuff that probably shouldn't factor in. And that's not how you think when you're trying to build a community, and you're looking at trying to have the dorms and the classrooms and everything be interesting and productive. And so I'm happy to see any emphasis on personal qualities. Of course, Susan, you've been very involved in character collaboratives and movements around having character play a role in the college admission process, more so than it often is. I mean, you've been involved in that work for decades.
Well, and it's really nothing new. I think the quantifying it now is probably what's a little bit new, but selective colleges have talked about community building and character for personal qualities for a long time. The danger of calling it character, it makes the public feel like there's a continuum of good to evil, which is not at all what the colleges are talking about. They're really talking about what are the qualities that empower kids to thrive on our campus and make valuable contributions to the classroom and the college community. And every college is responsible for doing the research that leads them to understand what it is that they can look for and try to identify that lets them make those predictions. But, there was research, I think Willingham's research at Harvard going back to like the 1970s was groundbreaking in the identification of predictors of success in college that were not academic. They call them non-cognitive. And that started it off. And some of the very early test optional colleges spent a lot of time looking at the ingredients for success that were cognitive, but also non-cognitive. So that whole idea of taking responsibility for one's education might be used by colleges to mean maybe slightly different things, but it almost always means initiative, engagement, and a whole bunch of other things that are evidenced in the high school application. Colleges are doing a better job of asking questions to suss out those qualities now. Some have been asking them for a long time, a long time.
Yeah, no, that's been going on the college side for a long time. It's us trying to educate the public,
right,
to realize, especially at schools that aren't just doing a transcript review exclusively, like these things really matter. They matter a lot to the schools. They matter, in deep and profound ways. And one of the things I said to David in that conversation is, I think in a lot of ways the 4 rating, the percentage is even low for personal qualities, because when people say writing, a lot of the value of the writing is what I'm learning about who you are, right?
That's right.
And so you might classify it as writing, but that's also personal qualities that you're is part of a huge part of the value of what makes the writing. It's not just how good of a writer you are, right?
Exactly.
Like,
No,
what am
it's
I
the
learning about you in terms of your character and how you'll be a contributor?
well, and there are many more questions this year. I'm sure you've seen it
Oh
on
yeah.
the supplements, the Common App supplements about talk about a time when you created a open environment for a sharing of differences, when you have participated in civil discourse, when you have been a bridge builder or a community builder. You know,
It is like night and day. I mean,
oh,
there's so many
absolutely.
questions about it. Susan, we probably should come back and have a conversation about 6 to 8 themes that we see
Yeah,
a lot
sure.
in these custom prompts, and just have a conversation with our listeners about that. Let's do that sometime. I think
I
that'd be
would love
fun.
to, because I honestly do believe that that is where a lot of admissions decisions are being made.
There's no question. And I mean, it makes sense though, because you want the diversity of learning from people who are different to not result in chaos and disunity, and people are at loggerheads with each other, and the dorms are not harmonious places to be. So you need people that can transcend relationally people that are just like them,
That's exactly
and
right.
that's incredibly valuable. And that's a lot of things. It's religion, it's economics, it's
Politics.
culture, politics, yeah,
Well, and I
race,
think,
ethnicity,
given the unrest on
ideology.
campuses last year,
Yes.
this, universities are frantic about community. They feel they've taken a huge hit when it comes to community and civil discourse. And it's on the academic level, it's on the social level, it's on the residential level. It's not going to be solved, right? Uh, it's not going to go away. But this is a generation of kids who went through the pandemic and kind of stopped at an important developmental stage of their life, learning those skills.
I'm gonna share something again, that's exactly an example of what you're talking about. So, I mentioned in a previous conversation we had that I got a chance to talk to Gary Clark about a lot of things at UCLA, and one of the questions I asked him was, if you could make any change to the UC app,
Ah,
what change would you make? Well, he really likes the app a lot because he likes the PIQs and he feels like they learn so much about character, and he's read at Pitzer, he's worked at Pitzer, USC. So he stands behind it. But then, Susan, this is what he said. If I could add one question, it would be this one right here that you just said.
oh, no kidding.
Yep. That exact question about getting along and having different, with people and having conversations, and what did you learn from someone? And then what it led to was a whole conversation that we had about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict on campus last year and how difficult it was.
Yes.
And I made this statement, well, haven't you guys had, the whole summer kind of to sort of figure that out? And then, and he helped me to understand. He said, well, we'll find out on October 7th, because that's like the
Yeah.
anniversary. And then the thing he helped me to understand is, listen, a lot of this is outside agitators. So we can do all of the training and even work on the selection process and admissions, but then outside agitators come in, and then a place like UCLA is a big target for the media.
That's right.
So if it happens on our campus, next thing you know, it's on CNN or it's in the LA Times. But it was interesting that if he could make one change, it would be have this question, so that you can tell how well somebody can function harmoniously and transcend differences, which just speaks to the value that you're bringing as a student if you demonstrate that skill.
That's right. And I hope it's a call to action on the part of high schools that have basically backed away from kind of programming and infusing in their kids' classroom experiences practice with speaking across differences and civil discourse. Because when high schools in this country are saying to teachers, you may not discuss race, religion, or politics in your classroom, then that gag order basically means kids aren't getting any practice, with listening to each other, speaking to each other, asking respectful questions. They're basically being told that this is, not something the schools are going to deal with. And I think we as a educational system have to take responsibility for teaching it, because I'm not sure a lot of families are doing it at home. It's very difficult.
Yeah. And you're totally right. And then when you think of college, a lot of colleges, not all, but a lot of colleges are more diverse than the high school the student is coming from.
Yeah, very often.
And even if they're not, maybe you're in a diverse high school, but kids still end up flocking to people like themselves, that's very different than living in a roommate situation, or on a dorm floor with people who are very different. And so colleges are struggling to make the big diversity experiment, and I'm using diversity in the broadest sense of the word, right? To make it work, but make it work harmoniously, because you can't have an environment that's just counterproductive to learning because it's so divisive and chaotic. And so, yeah, it's amazing how what happens in society ends up filtering its way into admissions. I had a stunning thing happening. I was meeting at the school that my kids went to because I'm still involved. And this is kind of going off tangent here, but I'm going to throw it out anyway. So, of course, in college now they have NIL deals, that you can get name, image, and likeness, and you can get paid. And the football league that governs the area has passed approval for high school kids
to
be able to get NIL deals, and for high schools to be able to incentivize kids as well. Now that was unheard of before. There was the regulatory committee had no merit-based money, only need-based.
Right.
But
oh my gosh.
What happens in the colleges trickles into the high schools. What happens in society trickles into the college. And when it's things that are deleterious, then you say, okay, what can we use? What tools do we have, corrective tools or awareness tools, to try to prevent? Because there was a lot of problems, especially with Israeli-Palestinian, but not only that, a lot of problems. And I'm sure you're hearing this, Susan, but I'm hearing a lot of people tell me that certain schools I'm not interested in because they didn't like what they saw on the news or what happened, and they're off the list. And it's hurting some of the East Coast. In my opinion, it's hurting some of the East Coast Ivy schools like Penn and Harvard and Columbia.
I'll be interested to see if their application numbers reflect that this year. I think we're all curious about that.
I know I see much more interested in Northwestern, Duke, Wash U, Vanderbilt, with the high-end kids, USC, Georgetown, a lot of those kids that would have looked at some of those Ivies, and it's only a sample size of 1 year, but it seems to me to be really noticeable. So we'll see. Maybe it's an outlier. I don't know. Are you seeing any of that?
Well, I think, we were all watching this fall. And I mean, granted, the fact that we have not seen the campus unrest this fall to the level that we saw it last year, especially in the spring, I think probably will reassure some parents about the safety of campuses. I think had it been otherwise, if what had gone on last spring had continued, especially
for Jewish students.
Oh, absolutely.
Especially for Jewish students, they're really watching that stuff very, very, very carefully and doing their homework and doing their research and talking to people,
which is good.
Yeah, no, it's what we always want. Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Maria, for sending in a second question. Send us a third. Your questions are great.
Best wishes to your son.
Yeah. Thanks, Susan.
Bye-bye.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, if you listen really attentively, you knew that you're supposed to be having the chief editor of the Princeton Review for this interview. That's what I sussed out on the end of the podcast on Monday. But something really interesting happened. I have a student I'm working with in suburban Boston, and her and her dad, they said, do you have any podcasts that you've done in case we end up getting deferred from some of these early schools? And, I gave him the conversation that Julia and I had on episode 391 and 393. And then I remembered, I said, we've had Rick Clark on the podcast 3 times. The first time he came on, he talked about the proper way to handle deferrals, denials, admits, and wait lists. Let me give that to this family. Before I do, let me go listen to it. I listened to that, and it was as relevant today as it was 6 years ago. And you're going to hear this interview. And it's funny because I did the interview at Georgia Tech, and Christmas was about to come up. So if I hadn't mentioned this to you, you would think he was talking about Christmas 2024. This was Christmas 2018. I've never, ever played an interview a second time. And I was kind of philosophically opposed to it. I'm like, you're a college-bound kid. We have fresh content all the time. But I don't let my pride get in the way. I listened to it, and I'm like, this is what families need to hear. So over the next 3 weeks, that's what you're going to hear. You're going to hear an excellent interview, in my opinion, that I did with Rick Clark on the proper way to handle deferrals, denials, admits, and wait lists. And today, it's all about deferrals. So in part 1, Rick tells us what a deferral is. He tells us what ways he has seen students and parents respond to deferrals. He talks about how a student should respond to a deferral. He talks about the many ways in which colleges and universities communicate their decisions. And he talks about, does a deferral mean different things at different schools? Listen and enjoy. I am super excited today. I'm with Rick Clark, Director of Undergraduate Admissions here at Georgia Tech. And it's the first time ever, Rick, in our podcast that I've actually done an interview sort of face-to-face. I'm on the campus at Georgia Tech, so pretty exciting stuff.
That's great. Yeah. Hey, thanks for coming to campus. I'm glad to do it.
Yeah, I've always admired how you guys, have read a file. I think you guys just do a fantastic job at holistically reading a file, and I wanted to get some of your feedback. But before we kind of dive into the subject content today, Rick, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and be sure to sort of include how you ended up at your current role at Tech.
Okay, sure. Happy to. Well, I'm actually an Atlanta native and grew up in this area and then went to college up in North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And there I was a tour guide and actually worked in the admission office a little bit and was a journalism major and got pretty interested in sort of tying the public relations, mass communications, into higher education and just as a career, looking at it a little differently than a lot of my, classmates who are looking to go more into traditional journalism. And so, from Chapel Hill, ended up at the Macaulay School, working in boarding admission. Macaulay's a boys prep school up in Chattanooga. I've also been at Wake Forest University and then down here first to Georgia State and then in 2003 to Georgia Tech. So actually 15 years now at Georgia Tech and just in the last month, 10 years as director. So that's the basic path. And it's been, a great career, a lot of different places, but really a fun path getting to where I am now.
I didn't know the Macaulay part. That's super, super exciting. Do you know Troy Kemp?
Of course.
I don't know if you know Troy.
I know him very well.
Yeah, everybody knows Troy.
He was teaching math when I was there and coaching lacrosse.
Yes. Yep. Good stuff. Well, off the record, you and I will have to have a conversation about boarding admissions, college admissions, similarities, differences. I'll look forward to doing that sometime. But let's transition though. So Rick and I, we had lunch, maybe 2 months or so ago, Rick, I think it was.
That's right. Yeah.
And yeah, and our regular listeners know that I love to have our interviewees talk about their passion. So I said, Rick, love to interview you. What would you like to talk about? And as soon as you threw out this subject, Rick, I was like, bingo, got it. That's perfect. And so what we're going to talk about today is the proper way to respond to 4 major admissions decisions that are very common. So why don't we kick it off with the first one, which is a deferral, which a lot of people are experiencing at this time of year. I think that's good timing on that one, Rick. Why don't you start out by explaining what a deferral is and maybe comment on various ways you've seen students and parents respond to a deferral?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Absolutely. So, I mean, a deferral, from the college side is essentially it's a maybe, and it's definitely a hold on. And basically we're going through that right now because we're releasing our decisions in mid-January. And I know, like you said, a lot of schools have put out their decisions recently. And the reason that schools defer is because, it's a couple of reasons. It kind of varies based on the student. It might be because they see some things in that student that they're excited about and that they're interested in. It might be that a student is on an upward grade trend and they want to see if that's going to continue. It might be that it's a student who's, from a certain place or in a certain major, or who kind of helps them in some way kind of shape their class. But they also want to see what else is coming in their regular decision group. And, as you know well, and I'm sure your listeners do too, with the way that applications continue to increase to a lot of schools, it used to be so much more predictable to think, all right, well, we've got this sort of percentage of our class in early, and we will likely get this percentage of our class in regular. But I think a lot of folks like myself around the country don't trust themselves anymore to know, because these percentage increases and some of the flipping of percentage balance of, one round to the next has led schools to defer in different ways. And so that's why schools are doing it, is in a lot of ways, they're hedging their bets. They're kind of protecting themselves and their class. They're putting out their definite admits early, and then they're taking this percentage of kids and pushing them over to the next round in order to just really kind of gauge them within the overall context of the pool, or to see more from that student. I think in terms of the way that families respond and react to a deferral, though, I mean, one of the biggest things I would say is many students who apply, especially to these more selective places, I mean, they've never been told no before, and a lot of times they've never been told maybe before. These are achievers. I mean, they've been the ones to make the team, and they've been the ones selected to be in the play, and they've been the first chair, and all these great things. And it can be a bit of an ego hit. It can, it can hit the pride a little. But I mean, one of the things that I hope that families sort of see this as is, it's not a no. I mean, they could have denied you, right? It was not a mistake. They didn't miscode that. It's a hold on. It's a maybe. It could work out. But too often, I think students think, well, they don't want me. They don't really want me. And so I'm just going to cancel, or I'm just going to move on. They don't do what schools ask them to. They don't send their grades. They don't fill out the form. They don't write the extra essay. They don't do the interview, whatever schools sort of put in place to help them finish this out. And I guess one of the biggest things I would tell students and families is just, try to put that ego in a box. And if you're still interested, you liked them enough to apply, see it through. It wasn't meant to be just one round. They call it a process for a reason. It's supposed to be, an entire year's cycle, and you signed up for that, really. So kind of see it through would be my advice.
So here's a question for you, because you know this, but there's such a wide range amongst the schools, colleges, in the landscape across the country in terms of how many kids they defer, even amongst highly competitives, right? So you've got a place like Georgetown, which pretty much defers everybody that they don't admit. Mm-hmm. You got the other extreme, Stanford. Deferral is quite an honor because they normally will deny you if they're not admitting you. I think they pride themselves on max of 1,000 deferrals. And then you got a lot of schools like your MITs and Browns that defer a lot of people. Mm-hmm. Sometimes, MIT just deferred over 6,000 in the early action round, a lot. So Why? This is a question I get a lot of times. Why is there such disparity? These are all highly selective schools between infrequently deferring and then deferring almost everyone. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on this one. So there is no doubt that there are some schools who probably both defer and sometimes waitlist as a soft no. I don't really agree with that, but
Right.
there's just no doubt that happens because, to your point, I mean, these are selective places. These are smart people. They know their numbers well enough. I mean, I said there's some, there is, some curveballs being thrown right now in terms of percentages of the class. But I mean, they should be able to do a better job of deferring more responsibly. And I do have a problem with that. I mean, I have a problem with that on the waitlist side. I have a problem with that on the deferral side. I mean, most of these. Yeah.
You and me both.
That's, I think it's unfortunate. I guess though, that for a student, they need to enter it, I think, though, thinking, all right, look, I'm not denied. I still have a fighter's chance. And if I'm interested, I just need to see it through. And they can't worry about that because at the end of the day, the defer is kind of like the waitlist. I mean, they are going to use those slots to shape their class, and it's not going to be ranked. It's not going to be fair. It is going to be, do we need more of this? Do we need more of that? And if you've continued the process, done what they asked you to do, you're still alive. And that's all you can control, right?
Yeah, Rick, why don't you give a couple examples of the this or that, just for, the newer listener that may not be following, the kinds of institutional needs that schools have that, that may cause them to be prioritized later when you're, when you're deciding who you're going to take from deferrals and flip to admits.
I'll use Georgia Tech as an example. Here's a really good one. So basically, as a state, public institution, we are not legislated like in the University of North Carolina system. But basically, we have determined, and it's been sort of an agreed upon appropriate balance to have 60% of our undergrads from our state, about 30% from other U.S. states, and about 10% from countries outside the United States. So when we defer students, and again, literally before you got here today, we were having these type of conversations. The type of student that you might defer from Georgia could vary from the type of student you might want to defer from a different state, right? And so when we come back here in early January, because January 1st is our regular decision, and we'll have all of our applications in, but it will precede when we release our decisions for early on January 12th. And just today we were saying, let's see what we have when we get back. Let's see what we actually have, because we may feel comfortable at that point deferring even less. Now, this sounds harsh, right? But I'm just being honest.
No, what
we were like, we could put another 500 to 1,000 students into the deny category because the strength of what we see coming in through regular. Or conversely, if our projections could be wrong. I mean, right now we're projecting 38,000, 38,500, something in that ballpark for total applications. For early action, we had 20,000. Right now, we have about 25,000, but we do think there's 13,000 more coming. But what if they don't? I mean, what if, quote, only 10 come, or what if 17 come? I mean, so all of those type of things, play in, right? And our schedule is different than other schools. I mean, some schools already deferred and they don't have their whole applicant pool in. And so, those are the type of calculations that schools are making. And those are some of the things that, play in when it comes to percentage that you defer or percentage you take early. Here's another good example. We over-enrolled last year. We had a higher yield than previous years in every demographic, international, domestic non-resident, and Georgia. So frankly, we are being more conservative this year in our early action release because we don't want to put ourselves in a spot where, we've got great applicants that come in regular and we don't have, the room to take them. And so, I'm sure there's someone out there who doesn't love hearing that. but that is the truth. And schools around the country, are looking at trends. Maybe it's a clean trend. They're just going up in their yield, or maybe they're going down in their number of applications. We've been a little up and down. I mean, our international population 2 years ago had a yield hit, and last year it was an all-time high. And so, sometimes it's one of those, like, the more you know, the less you understand, and the more you look at the data, the more you're like, what the heck is happening? So,
well, and I don't think a lot of people know how the complexities of admission, right? Because you've commented it just on the domestic, international, and in-state, but we could have talked about gender. You could have talked about particular majors, or some schools have, schools they're admitting into. You've got, racial, ethnic, socioeconomic, rural kids. All kinds of personalities, athletes, artists. There's lots of things, right? There's a lot involved in getting this thing right.
Oh, there's no doubt. And I mean, I've heard you talk about this before, but I mean, you lump all that under institutional priorities, and everybody's different, right? I mean, like 2 years ago, we started a neuroscience program. So that year, it was a good year to be a neuroscience major, because we needed and wanted a certain number. And then now applications have continued to go up, and the admit rate has been going down. So it varies year to year. And you're right. There's a lot of different sort of nuances within that.
So one more question for you, Rick, on deferrals, and then let's transition to another D, the denial. But this is the hard question, and I got this from a family I'm working with right now in New York City, and they were deferred by one of your Northeastern uber competitive schools that does early action unrestricted, whose name I won't mention, but you probably know. And and they saw the numbers. They said, why don't they just let my baby go? And so the question is this: how can somebody balance staying in the process to the end without fixating on that emotionally when schools? Now, one thing for another school, Georgetown, in their deferral letters this year, they said right in the letter, they said, we're going to take 10% of deferrals if all years are equal. So, how do you pursue the process, but yet not have your heart go out there so that you don't allow yourself to basically fall in love with other schools if, in fact, you have a 1 in 10 chance, or even less in some instances?
Yeah. Man, I mean, there's nothing I can really say that's gonna, I don't think that's really. It's either gonna ring very shallow, or, it's kind of like, if you use that same metaphor for like going on dates or falling in love or something. I mean, that's not easy.
Right.
There's no real script on that. I mean, I guess what I would say is, hopefully you are applying to schools where it's not maybe going to be equal, but you're excited about all of them. That's the ideal situation, right? Is that you have done a good enough job searching for schools and finding matches to where, you're kind of just excited to see the whole thing play out. And I think that, I guess the words I would use to try to in some way direct emotion is that you should just be excited about the uncertainty. And that is that's not the way we usually operate as people. I mean, we want control. We want to know what's going to happen. And I don't know, maybe this is because we're doing this interview right before Christmas, but isn't some of the beauty, and I've got young kids, but isn't some of the beauty of life the uncertainty? And I guess what I wonder, and it's like Christmas, I mean, or just the holidays in general, there's some uncertainty about it. There's some mystery, there's some just sort of beauty that comes in when you're a young kid, like how amazing this type of time of year is. And I guess what I would tell families and students is no, you don't know how this is all going to play out. Maybe you will be 1 in 10 for Georgetown, and maybe you won't. But if you've got other places and those decisions haven't come out, kind of just be excited about what's to come, even though you don't know exactly what that's going to be. Probably a good way to live in general, right? Because we convince ourselves we have control that we really don't. But that'd be my take.
And on the placement side, I try really hard to get families to do that. Love all your list, right? I say if there's only one school that will make you happy, that says more about you than the school. And a lot of times, actually, I find students can do a pretty good job of getting there. I mean, people aren't robots. So there's inevitably some schools are going to be more attractive than others. But you know who I find it's hardest with is the parents. And so the hardest part for me with deferrals when people stay in the pool and kind of pursue it at hyper competitive schools are the parents who can sometimes really inadvertently send a message to their kid that they'll be disappointed if this doesn't happen. But you know what? We're not going to solve this. We could be on here for until we die. We're not going to solve this issue. I think one thing we're both implicitly saying, though, is this is why we don't really like deferring kids that almost have no chance as a form of a soft no, because kids take it easier. Because, you know, to me, it's the equivalent of, you know, there's a girl you're always interested in and you ask her out and she keeps saying maybe, maybe, maybe. And if she's never really going to say no, it would be better if she just cut you loose so you could be emotionally freed up to move on.
It's true. There's a lot of parallels between admission and love. There is just no doubt.
Isn't there?
Oh yeah, man. I mean, hey, you write the love letters. That's the application. I mean, you know, people write you back and they send you glossy brochures and tell you, hey, come live with us for 4 or 5 years. You know, so there's a lot there, right?
I have to tell you a quick story on that, and then we'll transition to denials. So, you know, when I was at West End boarding school doing admissions, we used to call our admits and our denials. You know, we couldn't really get in all the reasons. We couldn't get all the reasons on the denial, but, you know, we could empathize, right? And so one case, the letter came out before the call, and then I ended up talking to the family, and the mom said, I feel like we've been like dating for like 6 months, and you dumped me with a letter in the mail.
Oh man.
So it just shows your point there. Friends, this concludes the first part of my interview with Rick Clark on how to handle a deferral. We hope you join us next week when he'll talk about how to handle denials and how to handle waitlists.
And now it's time for our college spotlight of the week.
Friends, Linda went on a tour for college counselors into the Indiana area, and she came back and said, DePauw, I loved it. Can I please do a spotlight? And I was like, absolutely yes. So her and Lisa got together, and they did a spotlight on DePauw. You'll hear first 17 minutes this week and the next 17 minutes next week. Listen and enjoy.
Good morning, Lisa.
Good morning, Linda. How are you?
I'm doing great. I am excited to talk to you today to revisit my trip this summer to Indiana, and we're going to talk about DePauw University.
All right. Well, I cannot wait to hear more about DePauw University.
I know, it's an exciting time. So let me tell you, I think DePauw is one of those hidden gems, and I'm just going to start with the basics. So this school was founded way back in 1837 as Indiana Asbury University and changed its name to DePauw in 1884.
And that's DePauw with a W, right? Not
Yes.
DePaul with an L, but DePauw with a
No.
W.
Yes.
Very different places.
Very different. Very different. This one located in a smallish town, Greencastle, population of about 11,000. And it's about 45 minutes outside of Indianapolis and only about 10 minutes off of I-70. So it's small town, but not in the complete middle of nowhere. And one of the exciting things is they were just named as one of the colleges that changed lives as of, I think, July or August of this year. And, you know, that's kind of a big deal. They don't add many new schools to that organization. So I was really happy to see that. This is a smallish school. It has about 1,900 students. You probably won't be surprised. About 51% of those are female, but 49% male. So it's a pretty even split. And diversity-wise, we're looking at, it's about 59% white, 8% Hispanic, 6% Black, 3% Asian, but more than 20% international. So they really do have a focus on international students. 37% of those students are coming from Indiana. And the biggest senders besides Indiana are Missouri, Ohio, New York, Texas, and California. But I really think like Chicago is probably really the biggest
But
sender.
that's interesting because, when my days in Illinois, I learned of DePauw and I'm like, this school is amazing. There's so many great things. And yet, if you mentioned it to people, they would just wrinkle their noses. And so I never heard of anyone, like, to my knowledge, going to DePauw, which is crazy given what it has going on for it. But
Yeah.
I don't know. It's sort of like how Ohio is now like how kids say that something's bad. Like if in the slang of the young people nowadays, if they say something is Ohio, that means it's not cool at all. I feel like the same kind of goes for Indiana, probably in certain respects. So not fair.
Well, Lisa, I'm just going to say, as a Michigander, that we've been saying
Oh, come on,
Ohio
Linda.
is bad for a long time. So
Oh, dear Lord.
I don't think that's anything new.
Okay.
I heard people say that growing up. Of course, I never disparaged Ohio, but
You
I thought,
just did on a podcast.
I just said that, but I wasn't saying that. That was just in the
Oh,
vernacular
other people.
back in
Yeah.
the day. It was other people. Many people say this, Lisa, not me.
Okay.
Um,
Me
but
neither.
I thought skibbity was the bad thing.
No,
Oh, is that not right?
we're not supposed to say that word according to
Okay.
my kids, but skibbity has no meaning.
Oh, like Ohio.
Ohio does, yeah. Linda.
I am so
Ohio has been
kidding.
maligned enough lately. They don't need any more.
I'm absolutely kidding. I love Ohio.
And Indiana, which is,
And
my
Indiana,
point.
I do. And absolutely. And I think those people that were turning their nose up at DePauw, they're crazy. I think it's a
I'll let them
great
know you said
school.
that. I still keep in touch with
Yes.
some of them.
Yeah, please let them know. Pass along my 2 cents.
I will.
It is a great school. And I think it has a lot to offer. And here's a figure. So when we were there on the tour, they were very excited about. They had just received $150 million donation from an anonymous source,
Yeah.
along with $50 million in matching funds. So $200 million, which will add to their endowment, which is already at $750 million. Their endowment per student is $413,000. They have a lot of resources. I mean, it's a nice place. And one of the things that DePauw is known for, is known for a lot of things, but is Greek life. So let's talk about what it's like on campus. This is definitely a Greek life friendly school. And about 60% of students go Greek. And it's probably closer to 70% for females joining sororities. And it makes sense because the first women's national sorority, Kappa Alpha Theta, was actually founded on the campus back in the 1800s. Like many small liberal arts schools, students have to live on campus for 4 years. They have multiple residence halls, ranging from traditional style to suite style. And of course, once you get out of that first year, you get more and more options. So second year students can opt to live in their chapter house if they're in a fraternity or sorority. And those Greek houses are actually owned or operated by the universities. So they have a lot of control over that. And then upperclassmen have even more options, and they can live in apartments, houses, duplexes. And again, those are all part of the campus. Learning living communities, they don't have those like a lot of colleges do, but you find those a lot in bigger schools. But they do have a rainbow community, which is LGBTQ welcoming floors in some of the residence halls that are inclusive, and they have events and resources. And then they just started one called the Artist Salon, which is for students who are interested in the fine arts. So you don't have to be majoring in the fine arts, but if you have an interest and want to hang out with others who want to talk about Monet or Manet, those could be your people. They have a lot of clubs. They even have a cricket club, and cricket, like the weird kind of baseball cricket, not the bugs, but they also have an entomology club. So if you like
both ends covered.
yes,
Either way,
so
one or
you
the other
can
you'll like.
you
Yeah.
can have the one with the funny looking bat or Jiminy crickets. So take your pick. And shout out to my upper Midwestern people, including Ohioans. They also have a euchre club. So that's fun. Academic support. In their Learning Commons, they have 3 centers. So they have one for writing. And I should just say, writing is a big deal at this school. Before you come on campus, fall of your freshman year, you have to take a writing placement test. But once you get there, they have the writing center and they will help you with the written word in any context. They have a quantitative reasoning center where you can get help with math and chemistry and comp sci, economics, really any of the hard sciences. And then also one for speaking and listening. So oral presentations, speeches, interviews, podcasting. I know, I feel like maybe I could have used this at some point in my life. And then they have peer tutoring, especially for those STEM courses. For advising, you get a first-year advisor, and then you'll get your major advisor in your second year because you don't declare your major until your second year. So you don't have to necessarily know when you apply what it is you want to study. Some of the resources on campus, they have a beautiful library. It just reopened in 2023, and they have a music and media library. So here you can check out sound recordings of various kinds, different types of media, scores, and it also houses the Music Instructional Technology Center. And I wish I would have seen this when I was there, but I didn't. And it's different kinds of tech used for composition, performance, research, and a lot of their music classes will be held there. They do have a Center for Diversity and Inclusion, counseling services, Student Disability Center, where you go for accommodations. And Lisa, they do allow emotional support animals.
Well, you
So
know how we feel about that.
I am in favor of it. You do need documented disability to have that supportive animal on campus, but it is allowed. Academics. So one of the other things I like about DePauw is they are on a 4-1-4-1 calendar. So they have fall and spring terms, and they also have a winter term in January and a Maymester. I love those. So that means for students, you have the ability to take advantage of short-term internships or short-term study abroad in those May and January terms, which I love. Average class size is small, no class more than 35 students, and the student to faculty ratio is 9-1. They have 3 schools, the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, which is definitely the biggest. And this is where you're going to get, classes or majors ranging from classical civilization to computer science to rhetoric and interpersonal communication. The Creative School, where you'll get art history, music, writing, and they have a minor for museum studies, which I think is really
That's cool.
interesting. I know, right? School of Business and Leadership. And, this is where you're going to get actuarial science, business analytics, and then finally the Institute of Music. And here you can get a Bachelor of Arts in Music or a Bachelor of Musical Arts. And for that, an audition is required. Some of their strongest programs are going to be economics, communications, writing, and really anything related to the natural sciences. The school it really leans into the liberal arts and sciences. And one of the examples that they shared on campus was they want their chemists to study caffeine and not to only think about the cool and magical properties of that molecule, but to have them think about the effects on the body, what it means to our culture, what it fuels in the arts, the impact on economics and business, the fact that it's only grown in certain latitudes. So they're really looking for students to gain that broad perspective. And they have just recently received a National Endowment for the Humanities grant to help plan courses linking business to the liberal arts. All first years have a first year seminar, and these are creative topics like portable power, the chemistry of batteries. And the point of these seminars is to focus on students, helping them learn, how to have deep conversations and be able to pull information from material. They have a focus on extended or experiential learning. All students must complete 2 extended studies experiences, and that can be short-term internships, independent study projects, research with faculty, or study abroad. And I think they make study abroad as accessible as they can. They have exchange programs in place with universities in Japan, Korea, China, and Turkey. And of course, there's a myriad of other programs out there. They do have an honors college, and this is truly for students who are interested in the life of the mind. You have that first year seminar plus 2 reading courses on interdisciplinary topics. Upperclassmen must complete 3 seminars focused on arts and humanities, the natural sciences, and the social sciences, and then a senior year thesis project where you conduct independent study under a faculty thesis sponsor. So this is one of those honors programs we always tell students, like, what does it mean? They're not all the same. Some, there's going to be some work. This one, there's going to be some work. To apply, you have to be admitted to DePauw first. And then you have a 500-word essay. And this is not your typical essay. So they've got, I think, 4 different options. And most of them relate to reading a passage and then giving thoughts on that. So they had, I'll tell you about the last one because they're quite in depth. The last prompt, that is an option. It's just a photograph, and it's titled Books Outside a Flooded Home in New Orleans. And it's what you would imagine a bookworm's library floor would look like after Katrina. It's just a pile of destroyed books. And the question is, what does this image say to you? You can take any approach or perspective you like in responding to the photograph. That is, you could tell a story based on the photo, look at it as a piece of art, or comment on the economic, political, social, or environmental meanings it might convey. I love prompts like that.
Yeah.
And if you don't read that and think, oh, I want to talk about that,
Not for you?
maybe the DePauw Honors Program is not for you. So I feel like students probably do a lot of self-selecting into that program.
Friends, this concludes the first part of Linda and Lisa breaking down DePauw University in Greencastle, Indiana. We hope you join us next week for the final part. Friends, on Monday's episode, I'm going to talk a little bit about a conversation that I had when I was at the College of William and Mary a week ago. When I visit, I go and talk to mission officers. Either I schedule them or I just randomly do it. This one was not scheduled in advance. And I've been to William and Mary 4 times, but I hadn't been in 19 years. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to take this trip. And I had some very interesting conversations 19 years ago after a tour with an admission officer when it comes to course curriculum. And I wanted to revisit that. So I had the same conversation again with a different admission officer. I think there's some things that you'll find interesting in that conversation. And it also coincides nicely with the question from a listener that was sent in. So I'll also answer that as well. And then after that, we've got a brand new interview for you. You're going to have to tune in and see what it is, but I think you're going to like it. I'll give you a hint. It has to do with Generation Z, and Lisa conducts it. See you on Monday, friends. And remember, it's not where you go. It's not where you go, but it's what you do when you get there. It's what you do when you get out of there. That is what will determine your career trajectory. See you on Monday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 15. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Linda Depker, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joyce Ducker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stalianos Dimitriou. And if you want to have a coaching session with Lisa, Linda, or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Our favorite method is for you to record your own voice at speakpipe.com/YCBK. By the way, check out our website where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcasts. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Monday and Thursday.